In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, I speak.
奉主耶穌基督聖名講話。
May God bless you all on this Holy Sabbath.
在今日講釋聖日，求主耶穌祝福大家。
And today I'd like to share with you about affections for God's house.
今日小弟想用呢個題目嘅愛慕神嘅殿嚟去彼此勉勵。
When we have affections within our heart,
當我哋心中有愛慕事情嘅時候，
there must be something that we like or something that we love within our heart.
我哋心目中一定有啲事情我哋所渴望、所中意嘅。
And when we grow with deep appreciation of those things in our heart,
當我哋對我哋心中所想嘅時候，有好深入嘅愛慕嘅時候，
then we find that affections will become stronger.
咁我呢種嘅愛慕嘅心就更加剛強啦。
If not, they wouldn't be there.
如果唔係嘅話，起初就唔會喺我哋心嘅裏邊。
Likewise, King David, he also had affections for the house of God.
同樣嘅，大衛王都有愛慕神嘅殿嘅心喺佢心裏邊。
Firstly, let's turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 29.
首先，我哋打開聖經呢個歷代志上第29章。
1 Chronicles 29, verse 3.
歷代志上第29章第3節。
1 Chronicles 29, verse 3.
第3節，29章第3節。
Moreover, because I have set my affections on the house of my God, I have given to the house of my God over and above all that I have prepared for the holy house of my own special treasures of gold and silver.
第3節，且因我心中愛慕我神的殿，就在預備建造聖殿的材料之外，有將我自己積蓄的金銀獻上，建造我神的殿。
And so here King David is talking about his affections for the house of God.
呢個就係記載呢個大王喺佢心裏邊點樣去愛慕神嘅殿。
If we look in the Chinese text, then we find it talks about it mentions specifically God's temple.
喺呢個中文版本聖經話好特別強調佢話就係神嘅殿。
So it gives us some more of appreciation of our reverence towards the temple of God.
讓我哋能夠更加理解你個點樣去切實愛慕神嘅殿。
Now, why is it that David have all these affections towards God's house?
點解大衛有呢個心嚟去愛慕神嘅殿呢？
Who else was to learn about having these affections for God's house?
仲有邊一個咁樣嚟學習你渴望神嘅殿呢？
And today for us, how can we continue with these affections for the house of God?
今日對於我哋講嘅，我哋點樣有呢個心嚟渴望神嘅殿呢？
Well, one of the ways we can actually grow in these affections for God's house.
唯有有呢種嘅心嚟去渴望神嘅心嚟去咁樣去增長嘅時候，
It involves our heart growing towards our heart growing in maturity towards this love of who God is and what He has done.
咁樣就讓我哋從心裏邊嘅慢慢嚟去成長，點樣去愛慕神，同埋咧去了解神係邊一個。
And I think this is one of the reasons why David continued to grow with these affections or deep love of God and the house of God.
或者呢個其中大衛一個愛慕嘅原因就係話點樣去愛慕認識神同埋愛慕神嘅殿。
The temple of God would be be built by Solomon.
神嘅殿係由所羅門所建造嘅。
And so when Solomon built this temple,
當所羅門王建造呢個聖殿嘅之前，
there is something that David had acknowledged about Solomon.
咁呢個大衛咧曾經囑咐所羅門所做嘅事。
And we turn to 1 Chronicles 29.
我哋再睇呢個歷代志上29章。
1 Chronicles 29 verse 1.
第一節。
1 Chronicles 29 verse 1.
歷代志上29章第一節。
Furthermore, King David said to all the assembly, My son Solomon, whom alone God has chosen, is young and inexperienced, and the work is great, because the temple is not for man, but for the Lord God.
第一節，大衛王對會眾說：我兒子所羅門是神特選的，還齡又嬌嫩，這工程甚大，因這殿不是為人，乃是為耶和華神建造的。
And so here we see David acknowledge that the temple is for God.
呢度大衛嘅好強調呢個聖殿係為神而建造嘅。
And David mentions that Solomon is the one to build the temple of God.
大衛你可以提及到係呢個所羅門王佢兒子係為呢個聖殿而去建造嘅。
And Solomon is God's choice.
呢個所羅門就係神所特選嘅。
But there's one thing that we can see in Solomon.
有件事我哋可以從所羅門身上見到嘅，
It seems that he's limited by being young and inexperienced.
佢嘅限制就因為佢年幼嬌嫩，同埋佢係冇呢個經驗嘅，
So it's like he lacks the maturity to be able to build the temple of God.
即係話佢冇呢個成熟嘅態度嚟去建造神嘅聖殿。
So this is a situation that Solomon would face going forward.
呢個就係所羅門前眾嘅所面對嘅事情。
And so sometimes when we face situations,
有時候我哋面對某些事情嘅時候，
we may find ourselves young and inexperienced about what we are going to face.
或者我哋覺得自己係年青嘅，我哋所面對嘅係冇經驗啊。
And then how we can mature to get better at what we are to do.
我哋點樣從我哋所要做嘅事情吸取咁多嘅經驗啊？
Sometimes we may say, well, I'm young and inexperienced, but I'm sure I can show the responsibility.
或者我哋有時會自問話，我係年青嘅，冇經驗嘅，但我有呢個能力。
I will try to do this myself.
但我要自己咁樣靠自己去做啦。
But Solomon, even though he was young and inexperienced,
雖然所羅門王係呢個幼嬌冇呢個年幼嬌嫩，
we find that there are certain principles that he pursued
但係有啲原則佢有去追求嘅，
that will guide him towards maturity,
嚟去帶領佢到呢個成熟嘅地步，
that will guide him more to become more experienced.
讓佢能夠越做越成熟，越有經驗。
So what did he do?
佢所做係乜嘢呢？
Let's take the two aspects of what Solomon did.
我睇下兩方面所羅門所做嘅。
Firstly, we look at Second Chronicles chapter 1.
我睇下呢個呢個歷代志下第一章。
Second Chronicles chapter 1 verse 10.
歷代志下第一章 ，first one。
Second Chronicles chapter 1 verse 10.
歷代志下第一章第10節。
Now give me wisdom and knowledge that I may go out and come in before this people, for who can judge this great people of yours?
第10節話：求你賜我智慧聰明，我好在這民前出入，不然誰能判斷這眾多的民呢？
And so here we see, even though Solomon was young and inexperienced,
呢度可以讓我哋睇到，雖然所羅門年幼嬌嫩係冇經驗嘅，
he find he cannot just pursue his own way.
但係佢唔能夠只係靠自己嘅方法去做，
Rather, what he's looking for is the way of the Lord.
反而嘅佢要尋求嘅就係神嘅方法。
And then this will become a channel to which he can mature and grow.
唯有咁樣呢個渠道，佢先能夠至於呢個長進同埋成熟。
And so today, if we are in this pursuit of wisdom and knowledge,
今日如果我能夠追求呢個智慧同埋聰明嘅
when we're
話，
willing to ask the Lord for this,
我哋可以係自願咁樣去向神去祈求。
then we'll find that as time goes on, we'll actually discover the affections that God has towards us.
當我咁樣做嘅時候，日子耐嘅時候，神會增加我哋愛慕有呢個愛慕神嗰種嘅心啦。
So that then the knowledge and wisdom is not only external or outwardly,
呢個智慧同埋呢個聰明唔係只係外表上嘅事情，
but from what God gives us,
神所賜俾我哋嘅
it will be from within.
係在我嘅內心裏邊嘅，
So that we're then able to then bring about this greatness.
讓我哋能夠帶出呢種嘅能力出嚟。
Solomon had a lot of pressure,
所羅門有好多嘅壓力，
because one of the things that David mentioned is that the temple must be exceedingly great.
因為曾經大衛所講嘅呢個神嘅殿一定要榮耀㗎。
So we find there's an expectation to reach towards.
咁從呢句説話就話俾佢知，佢有呢個期望要做嘅事情。
And so David mentioned about this certain standard for the temple.
因為大衛曾經嚟去提及到呢個聖殿嘅嗰種嘅標準啊，
So for Solomon,
所以對於呢個所羅門嚟去講嘅話，
despite his limitations,
雖然佢受到呢個限制，
this would be the good way to which he can grow towards maturity to then bring about this greatness of God's temple.
但係佢知道，接咗咁樣佢做嘅話，佢讓佢知道能夠帶俾佢有呢個長進同埋成熟嘅地步，
Just like what we do in the church,
就好似我哋今日喺教會所做嘅事，
or just like when we receive certain instructions,
或者我哋受到某些嘅指引，
we may lack that experience.
或者我哋係缺乏某些嘅呢個經驗，
But the more we're willing to ask God,
但係如果我願意去祈求神嘅話，
and we discover what he does to help us,
我要問神嚟去點樣去幫助我哋，
then within we can then manifest the glory of God.
咁樣我哋從此嘅就可以將神嘅榮耀嚟去彰顯出嚟。
We can then manifest the greatness of what God is expecting of his people.
咁我哋就能夠彰顯神要期望佢嘅百姓所要榮耀嘅嗰種嘅地步。
So this is what Solomon had learned to do.
呢個就係所羅門所要學習嘅事情。
But Solomon did not do this himself.
因為所羅門唔係佢單止自己去做嘅。
Even though the temple of God had to be great,
雖然神嘅聖殿將要嚟去彰顯呢個榮耀，
we find he was willing to assemble with God's people.
但佢能夠識得去聚集神嘅百姓，
And all of them have their attention towards the one true God.
咁所有嘅百姓都能夠集中呢個獨一真神嘅身上。
So let's turn to, again, 2 Chronicles chapter 1.
我再睇呢個歷代志上第一章
2 Chronicles chapter 1 verse 5.
第5節。
2 Chronicles chapter 1 verse 5.
歷代志上第一章第5節。
Now the bronze altar that Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, had made, he put before the tabernacle of the Lord. Solomon and the assembly sought him there.
第5節，並且戶珥的孫子烏利的兒子比撒力所造的銅壇，也在基遍耶和華的會幕前，所羅門和會眾都就近壇前。
And so we see that Solomon and the assembly had to sought after the Lord.
呢個就係所羅門所追蹤嘅呢個會眾嘅喺神嘅面前。
So when there's this beginning to seek after the Lord,
當佢哋開始嚟去尋求神嘅時候，
even though this is early stages,
雖然呢個係初步嘅工作，
even though it's early stages towards the temple, building the temple,
雖然呢個係建造呢個聖殿嘅初步嘅事情，
or to bring about greatness,
或者嚟去帶出呢個榮耀出嚟，
we find everybody needs to have the same heart and same mind.
我哋發現到所有嘅人都要做一心一意，
Just like with just like the consideration for a Silverton house.
就好似我哋想要賣呢個Silverton 呢個 house 呢個地方嘅時候，
Yeah, we all have the same heart and same mind towards this goal.
我哋對於呢個目標嘅所有嘅人一定要一心一意。
It may start off very small,
雖然係聚集時候非常之微小嘅力量，
but when we cause the Lord to see our heart,
但係當神嚟去祈求神睇到我哋嘅心嘅時候，
then gradually we can see the greatness of God among these people,
咁我哋就睇到神嘅能力嚟去充滿在人嘅身上，
to then be able to bring about this glorious outcome at the very end.
讓佢能夠到最後嘅從因此嚟去見到神嘅嗰種嘅榮耀出嚟。
So for David, he was not able to see this,
但係當時呢個大衛睇唔到咁嘅情形，
but he left Solomon with the foundations to be able to get to that goal at the
但
end.
佢帶領呢個所羅門有呢個資源嚟去達到呢個目標。
So we need to also learn to impart these words of wisdom about the one true God.
所以我應該要與神對一真神嘅說話嚟去進入我哋心裏邊，
So that the future generation will have a way and means to manifest the glory of God.
讓我哋日後嘅後代都能夠知道咁樣去做，將榮耀歸給神。
And then we'll find that the church of God is in safe hands.
所以我哋就知道神嘅殿就會喺呢個有呢個好嘅傳人啦。
Providing that the future generation do not let go of the principles of endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit.
讓我哋能夠將呢啲事情傳承俾後一代，讓後一代能夠咁樣去傳承下去，
And to continue with the same heart and same mind towards this goal to glorify the Lord.
讓佢哋能夠有同樣嘅一心一意嚟去榮耀神啊！
So this is an affection that Solomon was able to continue with.
呢個就係所羅門所要有呢個愛慕嘅心咁樣去傳承下去。
Now, if we go back to what David had in terms of his affections towards the temple of God,
你去睇翻轉頭，大衛點樣有呢個愛慕神嘅殿嘅心嘅時候，
we know that David gave his very best in preparations.
我哋睇到嘅大衛將佢最好嘅材料嚟去做呢個準備。
Whether it would be for Solomon, who was young and inexperienced,
雖然係俾到呢個所羅門王呢個齡幼嬌嫩同埋冇呢個經驗嘅時候，
so that he's better able to know what God expects of him to do.
但係佢都能夠知道神所期待佢要所做嘅事情。
Even though David gave his very best,
雖然大衛盡其所能，
he also did not overlook the best that were given by the congregation, the assembly.
所以佢係當時做一切嘅，喺會眾面前嚟佢俾最好嘅。
If we turn to 1 Chronicles 29.
我睇翻呢個歷代志上29章。
1 Chronicles 29, verse 17 and 18.
17至到18節。
1 Chronicles 29, verse 17 and 18.
歷代志上29章17至到18節。
I know also, my God, that you test the heart and have pleasure in uprightness. As for me, in the uprightness of my heart, I have willingly offered all these things. And now with joy I have seen your people who are present here to offer willingly to you. O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, our fathers, keep this forever in the intent, the thoughts of the heart of your people, and fix their heart towards you.
17節，我的神啊，我知道你察驗人心，喜悅正直，我以正直的心樂意獻上這一切物。現在我喜歡見你的物，在這裏都樂意奉獻與你。18節，又話我們列祖亞伯拉罕、以撒、以色列的神啊，求你使我的民常在這樣的心思意念，堅定他們的心歸看你。
And so here we find that David was able to observe the people of God offered their best.
呢度就係大衛點樣嚟個祝福神嘅百姓嚟為神獻上最好嘅。
They gave time in their offering.
佢獻上佢哋嘅時間。
Why were they able to give time in their offering?
因為佢奉獻佢哋嘅時間啦。
Because just as David says here,
就好似大衛呢度所講嘅
their hearts are towards God.
佢嘅心係看住神嘅。
So sometimes it's very difficult to see how one's heart is towards God.
有時好難見到一個人嘅心係咪看住神嘅。
But the one true God could see this.
但係獨一真神能夠見到。
And David could actually see the preparations of what they offered for this temple.
大衛能夠見到佢哋為呢個聖殿所預備嘅材料。
So again, this greatness starts from within the heart.
所以話最偉大嘅就係從心裏邊開始。
And so when these affections have a beginning and begin to grow,
當呢個愛慕嘅心越嚟越長重嘅時候，
then it can bring about a great blessed outcome for all.
就能夠帶到呢個外表大家嘅益處。
Because their heart's attention is fixed.
因為佢嘅心智係堅定嘅。
And they look forward to bring about a glorious outcome.
佢會能夠堅持睇到呢個好嘅呢個到最後。
So we find that when we have this heart to do so,
所以如果我有呢種心咁樣去做嘅話，
surely God will see.
當然神會見到。
And surely God will bring about a very good blessing, a
當
blessed
然
outcome.
神會賜更大嘅福氣。
You know, it's just like in one region of Taiwan,
就好似喺台灣嘅某個地方，
we find that the members had outgrown the size of the building.
咁見到呢個會眾嚟去增長啦。
The background of the members is that they're farmers.
咁呢個信徒嘅背後就係呢個田地嚟㗎。
But they realized they needed to purchase a new building.
但係佢哋發現到需要令佢再購物另一個物業。
But we find that within each family, as much as they were farmers, they tried to do other jobs in preparation for preparing for this temple for the Lord.
因為我哋知道佢哋呢啲信徒個個都係農夫㗎，咁佢哋所預備嘅係有限嘅，但佢會為神呢個聖殿嚟作預備。
So as time went on, they were moved more and more in heart.
咁時間慢慢過啦，咁佢哋心慢慢嚟去增長。
So when they did not give up fixing their heart or setting their heart towards the Lord,
當佢哋有呢個對神嗰種嘅堅定嘅心嘅時候，
in their prayers, in their preparations,
當佢喺呢個預備功夫同埋喺呢個禱告裏邊，
they could see the blessed outcome of God helping them along the way.
佢見到神喺呢個路途當中嚟佢點樣嚟去幫助佢哋。
So you find it's something they look forward to time and time again.
所以佢能夠見到呢件事情，佢係好渴望㗎。
Just like in the past week, we've had a wedding here.
就好似過去呢個星期呢度有呢個婚禮。
And then within the next 30 days, there's going to be another wedding.
跟住過多30
There's going to be
30 days，係 sure？
within 30 days.
喺30日裏邊咧，就有多一場嘅呢個婚禮啦。
But what we can actually see is the joy of preparing.
但我哋就發現到好開心嘅，就做呢個預備嘅工作。
The joy of allowing God to see our heart.
因為神嘅見到我哋嘅心，
So that whatever we offer in terms of our time and preparation and prayers,
無論我哋你去用幾多時間嚟去禱告預備，
we're hoping that God will be pleased.
但係我哋相信我哋會蒙神嘅悅納，
And we're hoping that everybody can see how everyone has given their best for this occasion.
讓我哋能夠每個人都要盡心意嚟去為呢件事嚟去預備。
So we find that this is also how we can build our affections over time.
呢個就係因為咁樣嘅緣故，就藉著咁樣去做，就將我哋嗰種愛慕心嚟去增長。
So when we build our affections in this way towards the Lord,
當我哋能夠對於神有呢個愛慕心嘅時候，
then we should be able to see the testimony from God to his people.
咁我哋就知道神點樣看佢嘅百姓有呢個證明啦。
That God approves and he is satisfied.
因為神係認許佢係悅納嘅。
And importantly, God abides with his people.
最重要嘅係神與佢嘅百姓同在。
Because they have not given up and set in their heart towards the Lord.
因為佢哋冇放棄對於神嘅心。
So one heart and one mind.
一心一意。
A united heart and a united mind.
係同心合意。
Surely will bring about stronger affections towards the one true God.
相信我哋會對神嗰種愛慕心係興旺嘅。
And this leads on to another matter that David had mentioned about affections.
呢度另外就提到大衛愛慕神嗰種心嘅事情。
David had affections towards the commandments of the Lord.
大衛有愛慕神嘅律法嘅心。
Not only was David familiar with the commandments of the Lord,
唔單止大衛佢係明白神嘅律法，
he encouraged God's people not to lose sight to keep all of them.
佢都鼓勵佢嘅百姓唔好看神嘅律法嚟到鬆懈。
If we turn to 1 Chronicles 28,
我睇下呢個歷代志上28章。
1 Chronicles 28.
歷代志上28章。
1 Chronicles 28 verse 8.
第8節。
1 Chronicles 28 verse 8.
歷代志上28章第8節。
Now therefore, in the sight of all Israel, the assembly of the Lord, and in the hearing of our God, be careful to seek out all the commandments of the Lord your God, that you may possess this good land and leave it as an inheritance for your children after you forever.
第8節，現今在耶和華的會中，以色列眾人眼前所說的，我們的神也聽見了。你們應當尋求耶和華你們神的一切誡命，謹守遵行，如此你們可以承受這美地，遺留給你們的子孫，永遠為業。
And so here we find that David encouraged all the household of God to seek out all the commandments of the Lord.
呢度就係百姓鼓勵當時會眾嚟去謹守神嘅誡命。
Not only did David say this,
唔單止大衛咁樣講，
he wished God to also know that David has given his best to let the people know about seeking out God's commandments.
佢都要讓神知道佢係咁樣嚟去帶領百姓嚟去明白神嘅誡命。
And so the reason here is very clear.
理由係非常之清楚㗎。
That they will be able to inherit from the Lord.
讓佢哋能夠可以承受呢個美地。
To possess this good of God.
就係領受神嘅呢個產業。
So if we continue to seek out all the commandments of the Lord,
如果我哋能夠去追求神一切嘅誡命嘅話，
whatever the Lord has instructed,
無論神所吩咐嘅，
it is for our good.
係為我哋好處。
It's for us to discover the blessing of God in the future.
為我哋能夠將來見到神嘅美意。
And so if we cause the Lord to see this,
讓神能夠知道嘅話，
then we'll actually be a living testimony about why we should honor all the commandments of the Lord.
我哋就成為咗活嘅見證啦。
You know, during the time of Moses, he was also instructing God's people to keep the commandments of the Lord.
喺摩西嘅時代，摩西都曾經吩咐百姓嚟遵守神一切嘅誡命，
So they can also experience success and prosper.
讓佢能夠體驗到一切嘅豐盛。
And so when they prosper with the Lord,
喺神睇到豐盛嘅時候，
they will be able to see the ultimate blessing from the Lord.
佢就睇到神嘅呢個完美嘅呢個祝福。
So we find in our heart and in our lives, we should not give up on this.
喺我哋日常生活當中，我哋心唔好放棄。
But as time goes on,
當時間慢慢轉變，
when we reflect and are in deep thought about the commandments of the Lord,
當我哋能夠思考 關於神嘅誡命嘅時候，
then as time goes on, we can appreciate deeper reasonings why God has given us these commandments.
我哋就明白到神點解你去賜呢啲誡命俾我哋遵守。
For us,
對於我哋嚟講，
for our children,
對於我哋嘅子
for
女，
the household of God,
或者對於神嘅聖殿裏邊，
to experience success and prosperity,
你去體驗呢個豐盛，
to experience the ultimate blessings from the Lord.
要體驗到神呢個完全嘅祝福。
So if we don't pursue after these,
如果我哋唔咁樣嚟去追求嘅話，
then what happens is that in our relationship with the Lord,
發生咩事咧？當我哋與神嘅關係嘅時候，
then sometimes we can then become more complacent.
或者有時好似覺得自滿自足。
So when we become more complacent, then the love or affections that we have towards the commandments of God is less stronger than before.
當我哋覺得自滿自足嘅時候，我哋對於愛慕神嘅心就比之前更少啦。
So even though today we are very familiar with the commandments of the Lord,
雖然我哋係對於神嘅律法係比較認識，
let's see in what way we can renew ourselves in appreciation of what God is sharing with us concerning His commandments.
或者我哋要睇下反省下我哋對於神嘅律法有邊方面可以嚟去做呢個改善。
And then we'll find it's a greater joy to our soul.
咁樣我哋就對於我哋自己得到呢個益處啦。
It's a greater joy because it's the deep thoughts of God to us.
我哋會得到呢個喜樂，因為我哋咁樣嚟深思神嘅說話。
And so when God is building up these deep thoughts about Him to us in our hearts,
當神喺我哋心裏邊嚟去慢慢讓我哋增長佢嘅誡命嘅時候，就我哋與神嘅關係就會得到長進。
then it's only then that over a period of time that we can appreciate more and more the deep love of God to us.
我哋咁樣，神嘅愛就越嚟越嚟去愛慕我哋。
And how true the Lord has been to us and still is to us,
神點樣嚟去真實嚟去愛慕我哋呢？
providing we do not let go of how we can renew ourselves to abide in the.
就係我哋唔好鬆懈，要更加捉緊神嘅說話。
And so then we find that this will then bring us a better direction and a better closeness with God than before.
咁樣我哋就會比以前更加嚟去親近神啦。
And then finally, there's another matter that David had mentioned.
到最後嘅呢個大衛曾經提見一件最後嘅事情。
David grew in the affections for the writings of the Lord. David had affections for what God had written.
大衛對於神所寫低嘅嘢有呢個愛慕。
Let's turn to 1 Chronicles 28.
睇下呢個歷代志上28章
1 Chronicles 28 verse 19.
19節。
1 Chronicles 28 verse 19.
歷代志上28章19節。
All this, said David, the Lord made me understand in writing by his hand upon me all the works of these plans.
19節，大衛說：這一切工作的樣式，都是耶和華用手畫出來，使我明白的。
And so here David is mentioning about how the Lord calls David to understand these writings and his plans, the plans of God.
呢度就係話大衛點樣嚟去祝福大衛，神點樣祝福大衛神用佢嘅手寫出一切嘅呢個工作嘅計劃。
The Lord made me understand.
佢話神使我明白。
So for David, maybe when he first received these plans of the Lord,
或者初大衛從神嗰度領受呢個工作嘅計劃，
maybe it took a bit of time to understand.
或者需要時間嚟去明白。
But as he continued to persevere with what God has shown him,
當如果佢能夠持續咁樣嚟去領受神所寫嘅呢個工作計劃嘅
with the
時候，
strength of the Lord's hand upon him,
神嘅慈愛就加添在佢身上。
then he's able to appreciate more what it is that God is trying to cause him to know and understand.
咁佢就會明白到神點樣去讓佢明白神嘅事情。
And then the affections become stronger to what God has done.
咁佢就會對於神所做嘅更加嚟愛慕。
The direction becomes clearer.
咁呢個方向你更加清楚。
Sometimes we understand.
有時我哋明白到，
Sometimes we don't understand.
有時我哋係唔明白嘅。
But God can give us this heart of understanding.
但係神讓我哋有呢個明白嘅心，
Providing we cause the Lord to know and see that we wish to understand his plans.
但讓我哋明白，讓我哋能夠向神追求明白神嘅計劃係啲乜嘢。
And if we are willing to do so,
如果我哋咁樣去做嘅話，
we'll find that God will share more and more of his plans.
神就會與佢嘅計劃同我哋分享。
Then our love of what God has shown becomes stronger.
咁神嘅愛對我心上更加呢個堅強啦。
And then we have a deeper appreciation further down the line than where we were before.
咁我哋對於起初嘅更加嚟去堅崇，
It's just like the Ethiopian eunuch.
就好似呢個埃提亞特太監，
He wanted to understand what he's reading.
佢所讀嘅佢唔明白，
He couldn't understand.
佢唔能夠明白。
Philip had to guide him.
但係呢個腓利嚟去指引佢，
So in that investment of time to guide him,
係需要一段時間嚟去帶領佢。
then he can see what it is of God's way towards him for salvation.
但係佢讓佢知道神點樣帶領佢呢個得救嘅功夫。
So if we cause God to see this type of heart,
但係如果我哋讓神能夠有呢種愛慕嘅心嘅時
to
候，
cause the Lord that we really wish to know his plans,
讓神教導我哋點樣知道神嘅計劃係啲乜嘢，
then our appreciation of what God does becomes stronger and greater.
我哋就會感激神嘅事情更加清楚啦。
So why is it that David wanted to let Solomon know about these plans?
大衛點樣讓所羅門王知道呢個計劃呢？
Why did he have so much respect for these plans of God?
點解佢要尊重神呢種嘅計劃
We look at verse 12.
？Which chapter？
First Chronicles chapter 28, verse 12.
呢個歷代志上28章12節。
First Chronicles 28, verse 12.
歷代志上28章12節。
The plans for all that he had by the Spirit of the course of the house of the Lord, of all the chambers of all around the treasuries, and of the house of God, and of the treasuries for the dedicated things.
12節有將俾靈感動所得的樣式，就是耶和華神定的院子，周圍的房屋、殿的庫庫和聖殿庫庫的一切樣式，都指示他。
And so here it talks about the plans by the Spirit.
呢個就係話講到俾靈感動嘅呢個計劃，
It's by the Spirit of God.
就係接咗神嘅靈。
So when Solomon had received these plans from David,
當呢個所羅門從大衛王身上所領受呢個藍圖嘅時候，
it seems like mere articles. It seems like just written documents.
睇上嚟只不過係一份文件而已。
But deep down within that,
但係喺呢個計劃嘅上邊，
it's the Spirit of God.
就係神嘅靈，
It's the plans he wants to execute.
就係呢個計劃佢要實踐出嚟嘅，
It's the plans that Solomon has to grow to respect.
就係所羅門所要盡佢力量所要完成嘅，
That he must carry them through.
佢一定要咁樣嚟實踐出嚟。
Just like the time of the Jerusalem Council. Just like the time of the Jerusalem Council.
就好似當時呢個以色列嘅會眾，
What was good to the Spirit was also good to the believers.
就係呢個
What was good to the Spirit of God?
就係呢個神嘅靈，
It will be beneficial and helpful for the believers.
就會對於相信嘅人得到益處。
So then when we give this the great respect that it deserves,
當我哋咁樣嚟去尊重呢個計劃嘅時候，
then we find that it will fulfill God's plan.
就會實踐神嘅計劃出嚟。
So this is what we can appreciate about the affections towards the house of God.
呢個就係我哋應該有啲愛慕神嘅殿嘅嗰種嘅愛慕。
We might be young or inexperienced,
雖然我哋係靈幼嬌嫩，
but we can ask God to give us knowledge and wisdom.
但係我哋可以向神嚟祈求呢個智慧同埋聰明。
The more we cause God to see that we wish to seek after all His commandments,
祈求 sorry。
the more we wish to seek after the commandments of God,
當我哋越追求神嘅命令嘅時候，
we find ourselves more renewed in the perspective according to God.
咁我哋就會更加明白到神嘅旨意。
And the more we think about these writings that God has prepared by Spirit,
當我哋嚟去睇到呢個神藉著靈所寫出嘅計劃嘅時候，
then even more how we can give this the utmost respect.
咁我哋就要更加嚟去尊重。
So may God bless everyone here.
祈求神祝福今日嘅各位弟兄姊妹。
Amen.
阿們。
Let's sing a concluding hymn.
唱首結束嘅讚美詩。
Hymn 368.
368首。
First verse and last verse.
第一同埋最收尾嗰節。